threw a whole load of questions at, and I'm really grateful that you took the time to sit and answer my numerous questions.
Because when you first moved to Asheville, and I did 10 years ago, it's a different experience of how you relate to the African American community. And I'm born and raised in Detroit. I've lived in Chicago, Detroit, New York, Boston, and coming recently from Miami, which I was really used to a very diverse environment.
Right.
And so when I first moved here, it was not clear to me who was what and what was what. So that was the beginning of the meeting. Now, was the film in? Well, let's talk about what Beneath the Veneer is all about. I mean, what is that's a title, but
yeah, I'll let Diane, because it's the title of her documentary, and and she can explain how they selected that title.
So I was really inspired by the title of his. Darin's title is Living Beneath the Veneer.
That was his research project.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in relation to the film that I'm directing, it seems to me that so much is going on beneath the veneer in terms of colour. And the more I look, the more amazed I am that it's set up the way it is. Now, Darin, fortunately, is on board with the project as the historical consultant, which helps us understand how we even got to where we are now. But there's still a really thick veneer, and beneath that, a lot of people are living a very unfortunate life. I mean, they're seriously disadvantaged.
And we're speaking relative to Asheville, North Carolina, and Buncombe County.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, inspired by the title, we decided to call the film Beneath the Veneer. And it really is a look at the people in general who live beneath that veneer, but not just locally, also nationally. The plan is to start production in January and to follow the lives of 5 or 6 young black boys between 12 and 19 who all live in Asheville, and to see their world through their eyes and to see the issues that they deal with every day. They're all part of a program you may have heard of called My Daddy Taught Me That, run by Keenan Lake. It's an enrichment program. And as it turns out, North Carolina has a really strong history of enrichment programs, a long history of African American men mentoring African American boys and young men. And really what Keenan Lake is doing is part of a whole tradition. And through his work of enriching the boys, we're able to explore the whole issue really of race and colour, both locally and nationally.
And does this program, has this been existing, this mentoring program, has that been ongoing here in Asheville? I mean, to your knowledge, Darin, or maybe you've participated in one way or the other?
It is. And yeah, I'm pleased to be a member of Keenan's board,
okay.
to serve on the board of My Daddy Taught Me That. And Keenan, I think, Keenan probably inspired by his own father, who was, I think, Benny Lake, his father, who played for the Harlem Globetrotters.
Okay.
His father, his father was a part of the, I think, that generation of people here in Asheville who helped integrate Asheville. And so I think he was one of the first athletes to play at a predominantly white institution. So I'm sure that Keenan has been inspired by, what his father did, and has been continuing that work. But I mean, as Diane said, with my dissertation, one of the things that I address in the dissertation, and we talk about this veneer, and it's not just Asheville that has this veneer. Asheville's veneer is interesting in that the tourism industry is such a big part of what Asheville is. I mean, even today, and it always has been. I mean, the post-Civil War period is when this tourism economy, especially opening it up for the larger, community, well, looking at the nation in general. Because before that, in the antebellum period, prior to the war, there was something of a tourism economy that existed here, but it catered more towards the members of the elite Southern.
And also pulmonary issues, and it was a big draw for that.
It was. And then that changed after the Civil War was over, and we see it today. I mean, it's such a big part of what Asheville is, and so Asheville, and in the state of North Carolina has participated in this, but Asheville in this case has been very, very, I would say, intentional about how it presents itself to the larger.
It tends to present itself as being this diverse, wide open,
It does.
anything goes. And if you remember the previous election, we're that blue dot in the middle of the red of Western North Carolina. So we present ourselves that way, but are we really that open and accepting and allowing people to be who you are?
Carol, we get into the history of it, it gets very interesting because, I would just reference the Civil War here because if you look at the Civil War, the Civil War period, this region of the state really, in a large section of this region of the state was Unionist. But Asheville, however, was not. In fact, Andrew Johnson ended up referring to it, as the vice president, he ended up referring to Asheville as the secessionist whole that existed in the Mountain South. But what also makes this region so unique is that Asheville is an urban center that exists in the middle of southern Appalachia. Western North Carolina forms a large part of southern Appalachia, which has a culture of its own, and that's something I think that has impacted how Asheville has developed.
So Diane, what you're trying to do is tell this story of the how would you describe Beneath the Veneer? If you had to sum up the movie like in one or two sentences as to its depiction of...
It's really looking at racial inequity and disparity. In relation to what Darin just said about tourism, yeah, that's how most people perceive Asheville. Well, there's an interesting statistic around the arrests of young black men. In the country as a whole, black men are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested than white men.
Is that true here as
In
well?
Asheville, black men are 5 times more likely to be arrested than white men. And so here we have this beautiful veneer of opulence and tourism and the mountains, and beneath the veneer, that
Ain't
statistic
necessarily
lives.
so.
Yeah, exactly.
And we talk about the word disparity has been linked a lot lately to economic. And so are you finding that statistic paralleling as well in your research or your awareness?
Absolutely. We can't get away from the classism that I see everywhere, and that fascinates me because I come from the UK, which is talked about as an extremely classist society, and it is. And I grew up hearing that America was a classless society. And when I moved here 7 years ago, that is not what I saw, and that's definitely not what I see now. That is one of the many myths alongside the myth that African Americans don't live in southern Appalachia, which I know you know personally.
That's right.
And there is an expression, Blackalacha, as you might be
Yeah,
familiar with it,
Affrilacha,
or
yeah,
Affrilacha,
Affrilacha,
which people are pursuing historically.
They are.
Because the African American was always here.
Right.
Unfortunately, came in via slavery. That would be my guess, anyway.
Right. Absolutely. In fact, I'm collaborating now with 2 other colleagues at the university on an article that will be coming out sometime later this year in a publication that's done at UNC Chapel Hill called Southern Cultures, that looks at really kind of exploring, what it means to be African American in this particular region of the state, and we're doing that through a collection of photographs that my grandfather, over the course of his life, actually took, and really gives us a very different image of what Asheville looked like in a very different time period in the late 1940s all the way up to 1980. But and I think that what's important about this and what's important about what Diane is doing in this project is that it's going to raise those questions. I think the most important question I would like to see answered out of this is, what does it mean to be African American in Southern Appalachia?
Today.
Today,
Okay.
and even historically. We when I look at the work that scholars have done in this region, one of the first Appalachian scholars was John C. Campbell. He's one of the
The
first
school, the John C. Campbell School, yeah.
That's right. But if you look at his work, which was published in 1921, The Southern Highlander in his homeland, he really dismisses, and I don't think that it was really intentional, but he dismisses the African American component of Southern Appalachia. It's not as important to study it, and then that was further that was built upon by the work of John Belcher, who was a sociologist who participated in the early 1960s in the effort to develop the the Appalachian Regional Commission, which was a part of the Kennedy administration's efforts. But he wrote an article that was published during the time when the Appalachian Regional Commission was being formed, which looked at the demographics of the region, and he, building upon John C. Campbell, just said, well, the African American component to the region is inconsequential. I mean, this is an outright dismissal of it, but I think scholars have done a lot to study what is the Native American experience here in Southern Appalachia with the Cherokee. We know a lot about that. You can look at the work of people like Theda Perdue, who has done tremendous work on the Cherokee experience here. You've got
and unfortunately nowadays the Cherokee experience, we're participating almost as a tourist or a voyeur, if you will, in a voyeuristic sort of way.
It is.
And I don't think that's what you want to have happen with the African American community.
That's right.
But percentage wise, would you say the African American population is somewhere in that 10-15%?
Yeah, around that.
Has that been
in the city
fairly static in terms of,
No, I think
or
it's
is
been
it growing,
changing.
It is.
diminishing?
I think about 7 years ago when I moved here, it was around 16-17%, and my understanding is it's around 9% now,
Yes.
as African Americans are being pushed out of the city into the county.
And I would assume that's a lot of it affordability issues
It is.
more than it is. I don't want to be
which is
here
a major,
anymore.
which
Yeah.
is a major issue here, and you raised the issue of economics, and which is something that Diane and Sekou are covering in this documentary film project. But that's one of the big issues, the lack of opportunities. I mean, here, we talk about America's never been a classless society. I mean, but we like to say, or at least we like to think, that people have the ability to move up, this upward mobility. But how real is that for everybody? In my research has demonstrated that while upward mobility is possible for a lot of people, there are certain groups that has been a major challenge for. And that is a major challenge for African Americans here. And especially when so much of our economy is focused on
It's service-based economy, which is not what you build middle class and upward mobility on.
So I'm interested in seeing how African Americans can become more involved in the arts, whatever that looks like. But what I would like to see as a scholar and someone who's working on looking at the issue of the Southern Appalachian experience of African Americans here, which this film, I think, that will be a component of what is a part of what Diane is doing with this film, will help many young African Americans who have artistic talent to begin to think about, how can we tap into exploring the Southern Appalachian experience of African Americans through the arts and present that. You have groups like the Carolina Chocolate Drops who have done a tremendous, I think, have tapped into that. But I think that there's even greater opportunity for that to happen.
Oh, because just because you're so you're just so limitless here. You've got visual arts, performance arts, almost everything you can possibly think of in a maybe micro scale relative to a metropolitan area, but it's here. I was just curious, are these 5 to 7 young men selected already, or is there criteria regarding that?
One is already selected. He's on board. He's 12. He's at Asheville Middle School. His family are on board. I'm in the process with Keenan of meeting the families of the other boys that we would like to follow. It needs to be something that they absolutely want to do.
Oh, it's a big commitment,
for a whole
obviously.
year to be followed at school, at home, in their communities, at the program. So that's in process. My hope is by the end of the year, or certainly by the beginning of next year, we will have all the boys selected as we go into production.
As a